This segment of the training videos is dealing with Exhibit A, artillery firepower. What you have in front of you is an 8-pound round shot. Solid spear of iron weighing roughly 8 pounds. And these are fired from the bores of the cannon towards the enemy formations, and they literally bounce, skip, or tear their way through the formations. Not a very pretty sight. But today, for the game purposes, I'm going to be covering artillery firepower, which of course can occur, just like infantry fire, at any point during the game, in any phase, in theory. But most of the time, it will be in the mutual artillery fire phase. Now in front of you is an artillery template, and this just happens to be one for an 8-gun battery. As before for the infantry, there's a total of 45 degrees arc of visibility for firing, with 22 degrees and a half on each side. So the arc to fire is from here and out to here. But unlike infantry, which has a minimum fire zone with muskets of only 2 inches, about here, artillery extends all the way out to 4 inches. And this of course has a greater impact in the game, with the ability for units to rally up while in a minimum fire zone, or even the ability to put a skirmisher into this zone. You cannot put, normally, unless there's terrain, skirmishers into a minimum fire zone of an artillery battery. So effectively, as you can see, these skirmishers are beyond the 4-inch range. Now, one of the first tests you have to determine is, can the battery fire at all? The battery has to be in an unlimbered position, which basically means the cannon are facing towards the potential enemies. If it was in a limber position, i.e. facing away from the enemy, it may not fire at all. It has to be in an unlimbered position to fire. As such. So that's sort of the first test. If you're limbered, you can't fire. Unlimbered, you can fire, assuming there's an enemy in your field of fire. Next thing is, unlike infantry, where the figures are practically next to each other, typically within 2 inches of each other for normal musketry firefights, artillery has a much larger range. It can theoretically go all the way out to 36 inches, but most cannon typically only go to 15 or 18 or 24 inches depending upon the weight of their shot. And that's pretty much long-range firing at those ranges anyway. But the thing is, the ability to hit and reach out and hit enemy targets is considerably farther than infantry firepower. So there is a requirement that you be able to see the enemy formation. So if it's partially hidden by terrain, and you can only see one figure of infantry, let's say the end of this infantry in the firing line, just that one figure, and you can't see the rest of these figures in this battalion, this would be an ineligible target. You must be able to see at least 2 figures of infantry, or 1 figure of cavalry, or at least the majority of an artillery battery, more than half, shall we say, for you to be able to open fire upon that target. It's just sort of a generic rule of being able to trace. Now keep in mind, so open order skirmishers never block visibility, and nor do enemy formations ever block visibility. It actually has to be a piece of terrain or something that will physically restrict your fire. So if you can only see 1 figure of infantry, and that's it for that entire unit, you're obviously going to have to seek another unit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the minimum fire zone. It extends out to 4 inches. So no open order formations are allowed to enter this unless they can go into terrain. And terrain can be simple as a hedge. They would be allowed to come up in here and hide behind the terrain. But if the hedge was not there, they would not be able to enter that minimum fire zone. Now if the gun moves up and unlimbers within 4 inches of the infantry, that's perfectly viable. The infantry can stay, it can never move in voluntarily. A couple other things. If you've got a unit that's in the minimum fire zone, and it happens to be in morale disorder, like example A here, it may not rally up, just like if you're in an infantry formed unit, minimum fire zone. Same rules apply. If you change formation or facing while in a minimum fire zone, just like under the infantry rules, and you're in the artillery minimum fire zone, you're going to get extra firepower applied upon you, and it could be quite deadly in some cases. So the artillery minimum fire zone has ability in a way in the game to lock units into position and prevent them to do formation changes or facing changes and suffer the effects of the firepower. Keep that in mind as you're doing your gaming tactics. And the other thing is, artillery as a general rule will always fire first and cause damage and possible morale checks before any infantry fire is given back in return. Now in the game there's various ammunition types. The default is round shot. If you don't actually call a shot before you roll your dice, it is assumed in the game to be automatically round shot, as I showed you earlier, that big spear of iron. Now the other shots are close range weaponry, which is called case or canister. This is a bunch of small balls or bits of iron and grapple, whatever thing, and the cannon effectively becomes a giant shotgun and just blows the material out towards the enemy. But it's considerably shorter range weaponry, typically 10 inches or less on the battlefield. There's another type of weaponry called shell or shell fire, and basically it's like that priorly seen round shot, except it's hollowed out. And when it goes flying out, typically with an arc type shape of trajectory, and lands and explodes because there's a fuse built into the base of the shell. At least that's what it's supposed to do hypothetically. Half the time it just goes out and lands in the dirt and just becomes a dud. There are other special types of artillery fire shells, things of that nature, English shrapnel, but the default is round shot. So if you don't call your shot, it's assumed automatically to be deep shot. Round shot. In the game, artillery has an ammunition supply requirement. Basically, as you shoot your shots, you're going to mark them off. So artillery effectively does not have unlimited ammunition, unlike typically the infantry units out there. If you've ever figured out how much weight a whole bunch of iron shot would carry in a wagon around the battlefield, plus all the gunpowder that's required, and all the caissons and things, you would understand why there's ammunition restrictions for artillery. Not to that, it also in the game prevents players from taking those proverbial once-in-a-million type shots with a whole battery of artillery, where tactical doctrine for the artillery would not even allow it. They wait until they can see the massed targets in front of them, the massed line, the massed column, and it's in a normal artillery range of maybe 500 or 600 yards, typically before they'll actually even consider opening fire with a cannon, of course, with great effect. They're not going to take the one cannon, lay it on the line, and take a sniping shot at the enemy general at 1,000 yards away. It just was not done. So as you look on your rosters, you'll see that there's a rostering for the actual ammunition of a battery. And once the battery runs out of the ammunition, it's considered to be low on ammunition, and its firepower is considerably reduced. It's effectively 1/4 firepower. They're out until it actually gets a resupply of ammunition from those train units, which we call the ammo trains.